Hi, everyone, and welcome to an Infernals edition. Can I say that? Is that, I think, maybe? An Infernals edition, comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with artist John J. Pearson. May I call you John? Is that okay?
That is absolutely fine. Yes.
All right, all right. Well, I typically start out by mentioning a couple of titles that folks out there might know you for. You've worked on Razor Blades, Batman Urban Legends, Department of Truth, which is just a mind-bending sort of a book, as well as several other projects. And the current one that is on the slate is Infernals, which you were kind enough to share an issue of with me. That's way too many prepositions. An issue of with me. Sorry, English teacher problems. But thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for the time.
You're very welcome. No, it's my pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always happy to talk shop with somebody. So yeah, it's great to be here.
Great, great. Well, by means of, I guess, kind of the origins question, how did you decide that comics were the space that you wanted to create in?
Um, well, I grew up in the UK with comics from a very young age. I've got two older brothers, and they both had subscriptions to the weekly comics in the UK, the Beano and the Dandy. So they were around me from the instant I was born, and I kind of grew up reading them weekly. But it was my oldest brother who was the main, I suppose, source of inspiration for me to get into comics and just storytelling in general. So he got me into a lot of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, that type of thing, but also the fighting fantasy books,
Mhm,
the
mhm.
choose your own adventure ones. And I absolutely adored those. And that was when I was at a very young age. And then it was when I was around about 10 that I discovered 2000 AD. And that was just the defining moment for me, really. I remember reading the first issue and being shocked and amazed that comics could be that adult and
Mhm.
convey so much emotional storytelling through the artwork, especially. Up until that point, I'd only ever really seen more cartoony artwork in comics, and that was a real eye opener. So that was the thing that really got me. Then from that, I went to my local library and then consumed as much as I could, reading a lot of the things like the early Vertigo titles, the
Mhm,
early Image
mhm.
titles, finding creators like Bill Sienkiewicz and Dave McKean, reading things like Arkham Asylum, The Sandman. All of that was just essential for me in understanding that comics can be a medium that could tell an interesting story, not just through what I was reading, but through what I could see, what I would see as well. And it wasn't necessarily always the case that they would match up. Sometimes they would tell different things at the same time. And there was nothing really like that I'd encountered, and that's kind of stayed with me ever since, really.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love the breadth of comics. I love the breadth of what comics can do, and your work really captures a particular vibe. I'll say vibe. So curious about how you decide sort of the creative energy to go for, sort of the atmosphere to build in a book.
For me, the main thing is the emotional side of the storytelling. So I'll normally work and collaborate with different writers, and it'll be part of that collaborative process for me is trying to determine what the emotional weight of each scene is, each
Mhm.
panel, each kind of the general story, and try and use that as a basis for what I'm doing. So whether or not it's straightforward and what a character is saying or thinking is aligning with what you're seeing, or whether it's more nuanced and there's actually something a little bit more interesting going there. Maybe there's a conflict of emotion, or it's something where it's not quite aligned. That for me is one of the main things that I'm always trying to do with my artwork, especially. And that's why I think with my approach, I'll have a fluidity to my art style sometimes. So it'll go from something where it is super realistic to something that is a little bit more sketchy, a bit more expressive based on what that storytelling is. Um, I mean, I think it's it should go without saying as well that legibility and being faithful to the story should be above all else.
Right, right.
But I think like I really like trying different divergent approaches to artwork for the storytelling that can kind of capture something a little bit more than a lot of comics that have a tendency to be a little bit throwaway.
Yeah. Now, do you have particular media that you like to sort of experiment with?
Um, I will use kind of anything really. I mean, it's tricky because I think with the deadlines of mainstream comics, especially, a lot of the time it will have to be largely digital.
Hmm.
If I could choose anything, then it would just be painted, but using a lot of ink and a lot of kind of watercolors, but with oil paints as well. But yeah, it's tricky because those time frames just don't exist in mainstream comics.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's trying to find that happy medium. But I don't think it's always a bad thing. I think sometimes having those constraints can fuel it a little bit better. So I'm not just messing around with the same images over and over again. So yeah, the deadlines are good.
Yeah, yeah. The deadlines on comics, it's a pretty intense kind of thing, I imagine, and something you really have to sort of negotiate and be built for in a way.
Yeah, it's something that I think over time you become more accustomed to, and I think it does help shape your approach to comics. I mean, I know a lot of people who will do very, very fast work, but I think a lot of it is down to not only their stylistic choices, but their stylistic influences as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think as much as I would maybe like sometimes to do a very realistic rendered um, fully painted approach to something. It's not always the case. But I think that means it will force me to examine a little bit more what's actually happening in the story. So I can maybe do something that is not only quicker based on deadlines, so it's actually something that's more interesting, would ultimately be better.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not always a bad thing being under the gun for getting the work done.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you shared an issue of Infernals with me, and there's a really cool atmosphere in the book. There are really interesting things happening with the story. Anything about this particular book and collaboration that you would want listeners to know about?
So I mean, it's not out yet. So the main thing would
That's
be,
yeah, it's a book, everyone. That's what I'm gonna say.
yeah. So it's a new series coming out through Image Comics. It's a collaboration between myself on the art and then writers Ryan Parrott and Noah Gardner. They're co-writing the series. The best way to describe it, I suppose, would be a dark family drama dealing with the spawn of Satan. So
Hmm.
the main premise is the Antichrist has a month left to live. He's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he has to decide out of his three children which of them is going to inherit his place as the Antichrist. But the story takes place from different perspectives. So it starts off with Abe Morgenstern, who is the Antichrist, and then it'll switch between his three children and their perspectives. And it's for me as an interesting one because on the surface it's kind of like this horror comic that deals with what you might stereotypically think as kind of satanic themes and the Antichrist and good and evil and all this. But the heart of it, it's a family drama and
Hmm.
it's a lot more nuanced than that. It just happens to be that they are um, the spawn of Satan. So um, it's those family relationships and those connections that I find are really interesting, but coupled with um, the idea that it's kind of a lot of different genres and it's not pinned down to one specific genre means I can play with a lot of visual interest and things that I can make exciting and things that I can find pleasure in. So
Nice.
one of my main influences comes from horror films. I love horror, especially
Yeah.
Italian giallo. So a lot of that comes into the first issue, but it's also about the nuances of these different individuals who have very um, polarizing and distinct personalities. So trying to capture that, I think for me is something that is what I'm aiming for this. And make it not only a fun comic to read, but also something that has rereadability when you can go back to it and you can kind of see little things that are picked up upon and see little kind of hints at some of the relationships throughout the series with the different characters.
Yeah, and to me, that's when a comic is working really well. When you go back and you go, "Oh, I didn't notice that the first time," and you can tell there's been some time that's been spent with it and lots of thought and planning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's always the best stuff for me when you get to the end and you've had you haven't just read a story, you've had an experience, and you want to
Hmm.
go back and experience it again. And each time you go back and experience it, you get something either new or something different, or it kind of builds on what you've read before. Which is yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's something that it's I think it's important to aim for, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the image site, and issue one in the United States is scheduled for Valentine's Day, February 14th. So if you're looking for that special gift for someone who loves comics and might enjoy a family drama, that also involves the spawn of Satan. That will be out then. Issue two, it's currently slated for March 20th. So those are on the way.
Yeah, the beautiful release date of February 14th is something that is feels like a gift that's been given to us.
Oh, yes,
We can-
absolutely.
Yeah, it's ironic as well because it was announced on Friday the 13th last year in New York. So it's
Mhm.
yeah, it's working out nicely.
Very nice, very nicely indeed. Well, by means of a final question, and we can of course hit anything that we might have missed. Curious about spaces where people can connect with you, and anything as far as I know we have Infernals, but anything else that you want to mention that currently has your creative attention.
So I mean, people can get in touch with me mainly on kind of social media, but you can spot me on my Patreon as well, where you can see more of my process and my thinking behind my artwork. But hopefully as well, coming up into the summer, you'll be able to see me face to face in the US because I think after this first arc of the Infernals, I'll be heading out to do some shows over there. It's still to be determined which ones I'll be doing,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I will be over there at some point. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat about my process and what I do in comics in general. So find me online just at John J. Pearson, across the board on social media, and send me a message, and I'll talk to you about comics.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to mention?
I don't think so. I think I mean I'm obviously working primarily on Infernals because my
Yes.
process takes a minute to do. I've got a few other things that are in the pipeline that I can't quite mention at the minute, but everything's kind of in line tonally with Infernals with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite a busy year for me. So there'll be more from me in the future as well.
Yeah, yeah, and much more as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode with Department of Truth, Batman Urban Legends, and other work that you've done with James. Is it Tynan? Is that right? I always want to say
Yeah,
that.
James Tanner. Yeah.
Yep. So lots out there to check out, and always fascinating work and fascinating visuals. So sending appreciation that way, and also John, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
No, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure having a little chat.